Test, test. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, thank you, sir. Is that good on your end as well? Okay, good, okay.
Hello, test, test. Hello. Okay.
Test, test. Can you hear me? Are we good? Better? Little closer. Here we are. Thank you.
Test, test, test. I blow the doors off. Test, test. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Testing, testing. Thanks. Test, test, test. Stay close, right? Okay.
Test, test 1, 2, check 1, 2. Test 1, 2.
Testing. Testing.
Test, test, test.
Everyone, we're going to start the meeting in 10 seconds.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Gilbert Town Council study session for Tuesday, August 3rd. We are happy to be here in our new facility, and we're going to have just a couple of items on our study session agenda this evening, starting with a discussion on the regional transportation tax by Rob Bohr.
Test. There we go. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Welcome back from your short council break. Nice to see you all. For those from the public who may not know, I'm Rob Bohr, Director of Intergovernmental Affairs with the town of Gilbert, and here tonight to give a regional transportation update. Specifically, what that means is we'll be talking about the potential extension of the half-cent regional sales tax for transportation, currently known as Proposition 400. You'll hear us always refer to it as Proposition 400 extension because we don't know the name of the number that will be assigned to that yet, assuming that we get to the ballot. So we don't want to mislead by using the wrong number, of course, so we'll always refer to it that way. Well, it'll be me presenting tonight. There's several others that are on standby that'll be able to answer any questions that come up or provide additional information that you're looking for, specifically or particularly with the Gilbert projects that are part of the proposed plan that we're currently working on moving forward. And if there's some technical questions related to what those projects entail or anything like that, we have several folks that are not only available tonight, but have really put tons and tons of effort over really the last couple of years at least into Gilbert's contributions towards developing a new regional transportation plan related to the half-cent tax. So some of those that I know are available either virtually or here in person to answer some of those questions. Jessica Marlowe, our Public Works Director, David Fabiano, our Gilbert Town Engineer, Chris Bridges, our Transportation Planner, and Susanna Strebel, our CIP. And CIP has really put a lot of effort over the past months or a year plus into helping us with everything related to developing this plan. So we can go ahead and move forward to the slideshow. Do I have a clicker? Oh, that's okay. Thank you. So tonight we'll get into a little bit of the history with the regional transportation sales tax. It's been around since 1986 with the first passage of Proposition 300, and then a little bit about the process, kind of where we've been, where we're at currently, and what we have to look forward to still, and then the scenario development. So this is really the work that's gone into, mostly at the MAG committee level and really behind the scenes, that's gone into developing a transportation plan that will be funded with that half-cent sales tax. And then finally, we'll get into the Gilbert projects that are part of at least the proposed plan as we're working off of right now. Obviously, we're looking tonight to not only provide an update, but also answer any questions that you all may have, and really get any feedback or thoughts about what we're presenting tonight as well. So at the end, or if you want to stop me along the way, we'll be happy to help answer some of those questions. So as I said, a little bit about the history. Proposition 300 was first passed by the voters, I believe, in 1984. So it was a 20-year period from 1986 to 2005. Proposition 300 was strictly for funding freeways and highways. And if we look at the total amount that was collected over that time period from the tax, it was about $3.77 billion. And then Proposition 400, which we're currently still working under, in addition to freeways and highways, we added in arterials and transit projects to that plan. And the total revenue from that 20-year period, while not complete yet, is looking to be looking as though it'll end up being about $8.75 billion. That was actually projected for quite a bit higher than that, but of course, as you know, we went through the Great Recession during this time period, so we did see some cutbacks during the enactment of Proposition 400. We actually had to rebalance the plan a couple times. So overall timeline as far as the process, just picked a few milestones here, but of course there's been many other tasks along the way. But back late in 2018, the managers came together and with MAG's help developed what they called the RTP working group. And our manager, Patrick, participated in this group as well as serving on the MAG Management Committee. The idea was to kind of take a deeper dive and have some discussions about some of the key policy issues related to the Prop 400 extension and look at some of, do some of the planning and discuss some of those aspects and you know what we might be looking at as far as a future plan. In addition to that group, the other MAG policy committees have played an extremely crucial role along the way and will continue to. So MAG TPC, Transportation Policy Committee, was actually created in statute from Proposition 400 as the body that sort of governs the decisions related to Proposition 400. And Mayor Peterson serves on MAG TPC, as well as MAG Regional Council, which is the overall governing board for MAG, Maricopa Association of Governments, which Mayor Peterson also serves on. I know Councilmember Anderson got a little stint there too while he was serving as interim, got to experience that as well for a while. So late 2019, 2020, we really started kind of looking, again, with the help of so many of our departments, started looking at all of our long-term plans, the CIP, and collecting what we considered our main priorities to be, in knowing that in the near future, MAG was going to be asking us to submit some of those priorities to begin developing the plan. So we did just that in I believe late April of 2020, right around the time kind of COVID hit actually. All the member agencies of MAG were due to submit all of their full wish list of all projects that we wanted to look at and have considered for the next 20 years plus, at least 20 years. So we did that, scoured through all of our plans and submitted a good number of projects. I think all in all, from all of the member agencies, it ended up being something like 1,500 projects that were submitted. MAG then took those 1,500 plus projects and did some scoring and analysis based on different criteria, and eventually came back and provided a list of kind of what finished above the line and what finished below the line. Then we had the chance to kind of work with them and make our arguments for those that we may have disagreed with or different priorities, and kind of help shift what we really wanted to focus on. I picked out the Pick Your Path public engagement that was throughout the month of May. That was an effort from MAG to really get out and meet with different stakeholder groups representing a wide variety of types of stakeholders. For example, they did come out and have a panel discussion with our Gilbert Mayor's Youth Advisory Commission, trying to target the young perspective, I guess, as far as transportation priorities. But that is far from the total public engagement or public participation that's happened. They actually did 2 months of polling over January and February, and I believe the month of March came and presented the results of the polling that was done, or the surveys that were done with the public to kind of show the sentiment as far as what they seem to be willing to do as far as a tax extension, and really what some of their priorities are in the way of transportation. So a lot of good information, and I will say, MAG will continue to do public outreach and polling and continue to engage the public throughout the rest of this process. So just these last couple months is when we really, MAG came back to the policy committees and presented some different options, some different scenarios, kind of straw man baseline points in time to kind of start from and really develop a plan moving forward and what that would look like. They came back with 4 different scenarios, but really 2 in a sense, because one of the they were looking at half cent compared to a full cent, and then in each of those they so there was a half cent and a full cent that was a system optimization priority, and a half cent and a full cent that was a new capacity priority. The difference there is there was a lot of overlap, really. A lot of projects kind of ended up in both buckets. The difference being new capacity really focused on new light rail lines, new freeway development, new capital, really, whereas system optimization was more of a focus on arterial projects, bus rapid transit, that sort of thing. The consensus really among the group was that the system optimization seemed to kind of fit the needs a little better, but there was some modifications made, so we'll get to that in a bit. So that's sort of where we're at this point. We'll take a look at the scenario that we are working off of right now. The last few points up here are you'll see there's no check mark because these are things that we have not yet accomplished. From the next several months, we'll be working on a air quality conformity analysis that is necessary with all of these types of plans. And then, of course, as the legislative session begins in January, the focus or the idea will be to have legislation passed that would allow us to then go to the County Board of Supervisors to get this put on the ballot to the voters for November 2022. Just one quick note there, Maricopa County is actually the only county that's required to go to the legislators for that approval. I think back in the 1980s there was legislation that required that if Maricopa County wanted to do a transportation tax, they would have to come back, or they would have to get legislation prior to going to the supervisors, going to the ballot. The other counties in Arizona actually are able to just go to their supervisors and go to the ballot for anything up to a 1 cent tax for transportation currently. So, as I said, as Mag kind of provided some good samples or some good data related to the projects that scored well, it really became time recently to start getting down to some of the big policy considerations and determining where we're at with that, and also putting together what we can really start to work off of as a plan moving forward that would be part of the legislation and ultimately the ballot proposal. So some of the key things that had to be determined over that time, one of the big ones I kind of mentioned already, and that was the determination of whether we were going to continue with the half cent, as been the case with Proposition 300 and 400, or if there was too much of a need and it was going to be too competitive as far as projects, and we had to look at moving up to a full cent or somewhere in between. I know there was people on both sides of the fence initially. I think as we started looking at the scenarios more and more, I think there started to be a little bit more of a, settled in more and more to the fact that I think we got a little further with the half cent than we maybe thought we were going to be able to, and of course everybody was more than happy to not have to take that risk of trying to increase taxes, and of course it's something we never want to do for our residents. But along those lines, there was definitely some key priorities that didn't make it in. So one of the things that came up in discussion was to look at a term beyond the 20 years. So one suggestion was to look at a 25-year term, see where that got us, and if that could get in some of those key projects that wouldn't otherwise be included. That ended up being the case, and I think people were excited about sort of what that extra 5 years got us without having to raise the tax rate. I already kind of mentioned the system optimization versus new capacity, which was another consideration. Tended to be a lot of support for the system optimization, which is good for us because it's more of a focus on arterials and those types of things. And then these other policy considerations, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide where I think they can be explained a little bit better because it does a kind of a side-by-side scenario of what we're looking at currently in comparison to Prop 400, which is what we're currently under until 2025. So if you look at the projected revenue, obviously quite a difference there, but keep in mind that you have the extra 5 years. So I think we're at 14-something billion, and it added about $5 billion to that projected revenue when you tag that 5 years on at the end of the term. So that's the second point there is that difference in term from 25 years as opposed to 20 years. Another key consideration was related to what we call buckets or firewalls. So Proposition 400, the legislation actually specified or capped the amount of money that could go to the different modes of transportation. So in other words, you'll see the numbers there on the right. Freeway was capped at 52.5% of the total revenue, 33 1/3 for transit, and then 10.5% for arterials. The proposal by MAG and what we're currently working from does not have those buckets or firewalls. Which the obvious advantage there is that it allows for more flexibility. There was no moving from one of those modes to the other. It was prohibited by statute. So really there was no mixing and matching, whereas obviously this gives a little bit more flexibility. I guess the downside or the counterpoint would be just not quite as much certainty or knowing quite as much exactly what you're looking at moving forward. And then finally, one other point, with Prop 400, obviously, we're looking at a lot of the development of new capital related to light rail. The scenario we're currently working off of for the extension includes some asset management for that light rail capital. MAG's interpretation of federal law is that because federal money is used for capital projects, that they're then required to assure that some of that asset, some of that upkeep is also included in future plans. It does not include any operations, just the asset management. Just one more slide just to provide a little bit more information about the proposed plan moving forward. And this is going to get a little bit even more confusing, I guess, but we also talk about the Regional Transportation Plan, the RTP, and that's the future 25-year framework of all regional transportation, both funding sources and amounts and projected projects. So it's beyond just the half-cent sales tax. It's also any federal money that is programmed to come into the region, or other funding sources that are programmed to come into the region, and then it programs out all of those different all of those different projects and programs based on that funding amount. So just want to make sure and point out that when we look at that RTP, it's not just the arterial projects and freeway projects and transit, but there's all these other programs that we've actually taken advantage of here in Gilbert a lot over the years and will continue to do so. Things like the safe routes to schools, the TSOP, which is the system optimization with lighting. One very key one moving forward, because I know we have a lot of projects in this area, would be active transportation, all the trail development that we'll continue to work on in Gilbert. Street sweepers is something we fund every year with these programs. So just something to keep in mind that when we look comprehensively, that includes a lot of these programs that aren't necessarily part of just that half-cent sales tax, but the half-cent sales tax does go into several of these or many of these and supplement these programs. And then finally, just a quick point, everything the MAG has put forward, they've continued to make sure that there is that regional balance across, and the way they do that is really divided by East Valley, West Valley, and then Central, which is really City of Phoenix. And if you look at population and then the share of the regional transportation, the RTP, in comparison to that, you'll see that they've made efforts to really keep those geographically balanced. So here's just a real quick look at talking about the half-cent 25 years scenario at overall region-wide, what this looks like, and the projects. You'll see the key there, which shows all the different types of projects, and see where we're looking at development. You can see it's pretty spread out throughout the region, pretty well distributed. I will say, so down in the left-hand corner in the Southwest Valley, that dotted blue line there is the SR30. When we talk about the extending to the 25-year plan, that was probably one of the big pieces that went into that. That was really a priority for that region. But it's also a huge dollar amount project between right-of-way and construction. It's really a large-scale project. So when it came time to divvy up that additional $5 billion at the end of that 25-year term, it was up to the West Valley to say, okay, we understand this is that big of a priority. We'll be willing to put a good deal of our portion of those funds towards that project. So here's where we get into our Gilbert projects specific to arterial and freeway. And this doesn't include any transit, which I'll explain here in a bit. And obviously doesn't include those other programs that I showed earlier. But you'll see a good list here of pretty significant projects that we're looking at. Those first 7 there are arterials, and then the bottom 2 are the freeway and highway projects that we're looking at. So I can come back to that if anybody wants to take a look, but kind of along those same lines, this is a map that shows those arterial projects and sort of where they're located, so maybe help visualize just a little bit what we're looking at when we talk about these 7 projects. I'll just go back to it for a second. So we can come back there. We're just about done, so if anybody had any specific questions about the projects or just in general, happy to answer those. I mentioned transit briefly. You notice we didn't have a list of specific transit projects, and there's a good reason for that, because there really isn't one yet. The concept with transit moving forward is going to be more of a formulaic, performance-based approach. So we have yet to see a lot of details as far as what that looks like, but we do know that the approach will be to make decisions along the way in the future based on ridership, based on performance, making sure that it's a regional system that continues to operate in a way that's functional by hitting on the areas that are most important, but still allowing some oversight from us as member agencies. So a few things that we do know related to transit: bus lanes that were already part of Prop 400 will be completed, even if they're not done at the end of this period. In the next few years, they'll carry over to the extension. Something key for us: ADA costs, paratransit, will be regionally funded, and that's different than what it's been in the past. And then there was a push for circulators. Originally, these were intended to be ineligible programs as for the extension, and wouldn't be something that would be funded. But there was some cities that really wanted to consider, at least keep them eligible in certain circumstances, and one of those is really that they fall in line with the supergrid system and contribute to it, but it might be an area where it does not yet make sense to have a full bus line, but you're able to have a circulator that kind of fills that intermediary need until we get to the point where we're ready to move forward with further development. So, I know that's a lot, but that's what I have for tonight. Probably could have gone a lot more in depth with all the work that's been done. But if anybody has any thoughts, questions, or concerns, we're happy to address those now.
Thanks, Rob. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Are we sure we don't want to talk about Route 30 a little bit more? Oh, just kidding. We've talked about it a lot for the West Valley. Yes. Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Rob, for the update on that. Wow, that sounds so loud. I have several questions. One, you mentioned, and I can't remember who you said actually did the polling, but what was the line of questioning there? Were we polling actual maps? Were we polling legislative language? Were we polling what a ballot language would look like ultimately to the voters? Conceptual half-cent tax, this, aggregate number? What were they polling? Because
a lot of that. It really touched on a lot of different areas, and I can actually share, documents what was presented in the MAG meeting following that showed the results. But I would say, to answer your question, it focused on how willing folks were to extend the tax, how willing they'd be to increase the tax. First of all, how much they think transportation is worth funding, and then got into priorities, specific priorities within transportation, kind of asking about what do you prefer, what's more important to you, is time efficiency more important, or building new capacity more important? Is it more important to get around your neighborhood, or more important to be able to get to Phoenix from Gilbert, or so it really got into a wide variety of questions, and I'd be happy to share some of the results.
Gotcha. And then I assume there's been some work to meet with specific chairmen of committees and legislators who obviously are going to have to weigh in. This will ultimately, be determined if you can get 3116 in one session.
Absolutely. There's been initial conversations for sure, but obviously, as we kind of get to this new point where we're really looking at something concrete and get closer to next session, that will really ramp up as far as that communication. But MAG has actually done series of meetings over the last couple of years with a lot of legislators, but key legislators as well as county supervisors too. So yes, there's been outreach, but it's going to ramp up exponentially from here for sure.
Okay, because this isn't the first bill that will have been proposed at the legislature for an extension. So obviously there have been specific headwinds, and those are well documented in public testimony. So we understand what some of the hesitation from certain lawmakers, specifically in Maricopa County, obviously, because this is, that's going to dominate the decision on this. What I guess measures have been taken to make this substantively different than past bills?
So Mayor and Council Member, I'll say the past efforts were kind of done outside of this process, or outside of really Maricopa Association government's involvement. It was kind of some ideas from other stakeholder groups, legislators. Not that we definitely met and worked on what maybe we could do to kind of make that something that's workable for the region, but this will be really the first effort that is kind of done in line with how it's been done in the past propositions, and with all of the sort of work that's gone into it, I guess, from all the stakeholders.
Mayor, with your indulgence, if I might just flag one of those issues to keep in mind as this moves forward. Back when in 2003, I think, when this was being originally debated, it was pretty contentious, those formulas that ultimately got baked into the statute. So much so that they wanted to strip them out into separate votes for every single one, which failed. And so we've got that kind of, like I said, baked into the equation. But one of the things that has been brought up in previous years is the desire for more oversight, more guardrails, rather than the direction of fewer firewalls. So I would flag that as a concern that I've heard the legislature that I would have a concern with, because specifically we have a lot of lawmakers who don't represent places like Phoenix or don't represent Mesa, who don't want their regional tax dollars cannibalized by City of Phoenix dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into light rail, which arguably is something that I think should have robust policy debate at the very least, if that's how we want regional monies to be spent. And so if we remove that ceiling or floor, however we want to call it, the ceiling of 33% to go to projects like that, I think the concern would be that more money would go to those projects. And the legislators, I wouldn't blame them for not relinquishing the authority and just saying, the constituents that you represent, good luck. I hope this process works for you. I don't think that's how that's going to play out. Yeah,
Mayor, Councilmember Yantes noted and definitely understood. I totally, you're 100% spot on. I think, in past discussions, I think having a cap on light rail has always kind of come up as one of those discussion items among certain legislators, not wanting to make sure that there isn't a lot of money invested in light rail if they're opposed to transit in general, or specifically light rail. I maybe oversimplified a little bit. It does provide a little bit more flexibility, but there are definitely parameters built in. Without getting too into the system or too complicated, there are some parameters built in as far as what can be done and what can't be done. And obviously, with the plan itself, it sort of lays out, amounts of the different modes. I would also maybe venture to guess that I guess light rails maybe doesn't have as much steam for new capital in the region anymore. Outside of Phoenix and Mesa and some of those areas, I think there's maybe a little bit less desire. So it's maybe not quite as much, and this is kind of speculation on my part, but maybe not quite as much of a on the radar type thing when I think it's pretty evident that there's not a big push to add light rail, but that's more speculation. But I agreed, and it's going to be part of the effort related to working with the legislators and making sure that that's all understood and that they're comfortable with it.
My suggestion on a cap would be 0, but
I'm sorry, what was that?
With my cap suggestion would be 0. I had another question because anybody who's taken a look at these transportation statutes, they're a bit of a mess. And there's 3 different statutes dictating this as far as the tax goes. I don't know if part of what's going to be proposed is any cleanup of this, any clarification on variable rates. There's a decision on Pinal County's that's hit the Supreme Court, so we don't know what that looks like yet. But I don't know if there's any effort or discussion about cleaning this, or are we going to introduce a new statute and it's going to be just as confusing and discombobulated as this is.
Yeah, Councilmember Jens says that's another great point. And I think now is the time where we really start diving into those conversations. So much has been up to this point about more development of the plan, and now is where we really shift to those types of conversation as far as what some of those looks like. And that's really good feedback going into those conversations. I think it's great to look at that and include that in our thoughts.
Councilmember Tilke.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilman Member Yantes, that's such a long title to say, but thanks for your comments. I appreciate those, and I agree that not having these buckets defined does set us up for failure, and I think that gives the community the transparency of what they're voting for, and so I think that needs to be in there. I know light rail is a big red flag for a lot of people, and to identify what that really means, I think will help this be passed. There is going to be a lot of talk that's going to have to happen with the legislature, as you mentioned, and so I know some work's been done, but I think that's going to be really important as they look at even giving us the approval to move forward to go to the voters. So I guess my point is I would definitely look at buckets. If we don't have those and it's not clearly defined, we're going to be eating our own within the East Valley and then trying to protect dollars for the East Valley from other communities, and that's not where we want to be. We want to be really clear where this money is going to be going and how it's going to be invested in our infrastructure. And we just got back traveling in the Midwest, and when you don't invest in that infrastructure, you've got big problems. We were in Green Bay, and they haven't done maintenance on their bridge, and I don't know if you've seen it on the and it's been open a month, and they can't close it, and so that's half of their transportation into their downtown. And so while that's an extreme case, if we're not investing wisely in our infrastructure, we could have issues like that. So good luck as you move forward. It's a big, heavy lift for you, Patrick.
Thank you. Again, good feedback, and I will follow up with kind of a little bit more information about sort of what that looks like as far as the modes and what kind of guardrails are there without specifically having the buckets. And I'm glad you made the point about other parts of the country, because everything, nearly all the major freeway projects here over the last almost 40 years now have been funded from this tax, and as well as a lot of the major arterial projects and everything. And I think we've got a pretty good system when it comes down to it. Not that we don't get frustrated while we're driving sometimes, but compared to a lot of the other cities and areas, I think we have a pretty good system here, and it's largely responsible from this.
Any other questions for Rob?
I have two more questions, Rob. So what's being proposed, obviously, if it passes, 2022 goes about November, would the collection start after the expiration of the current in 2025?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so this plan really doesn't go into effect until 26.
Okay, so you guys still have a couple of years then, in case.
Yeah, well, the plan will be to go maintenance and replacement like that, but it does, like I mentioned there with the asset management, it does include some of the, I guess, upkeep of the capital investment that wasn't there, was really the responsibility of the local government in the past, or maybe wasn't quite that necessary because light rail was so new at that time.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions for Rob? You can always reach out to Rob if you have more questions, inquiries on what's going on with Prop 400 as we move forward with this. It's been a long conversation so far, and I expect a lot more as the months come.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rob.
Mayor, thank you for all your efforts with it. I know it's been, like you said, it's been something you've been working on regularly, and it's been ongoing for quite some time. And I think we've kind of maybe jumping one hurdle, and we got another one to go here. So.
Absolutely, and Councilmember Tilke makes a great point. If you drove anywhere on a vacation this summer, you appreciate the roads in Arizona, I think. Yeah. Or they're worse. Oh, in this part of Arizona, then, we'll say. In Maricopa County, Arizona. Thanks, Rob. Thanks very much. Next up, we have the presentation.
Mayor, may I ask you a question? Will we have an opportunity to take a vote on this once we have bill language prior to taking a position on this the next session? Because this really is, kind of an important discussion to have as a community from a policy standpoint.
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Jens, is definitely something we can discuss. I think maybe a little bit veering off from the focus of this update today, but I know we've kind of had similar conversations about sort of the legislative approach and covering some of those things as far as council. So I think, we can definitely talk about that, but I think there'll be the opportunity to at least provide another update and get input at another time. So.
Be happy to.
Yeah, I'd be in favor of that. Anytime we can provide clarity as the position we're taking as a community on things we're going to engage on legislatively, I think has value.
Yes, and I was very adamant about not going above the half cent, and I wasn't even 100% on board with the 25 years, but I thought it was a much better choice considering Maricopa County is the only county that has to go through the legislature. It gives us a little bit more wiggle room, and again, this isn't going to kick in until 2026. Looking at these projects is very long range at this point. Even for us to put projects into this, we kept looking at them and thinking, but we want that done before 2026, and these funds won't even start potentially until 2026. So there's a lot of discussion going into this.
Yeah, and to that point, obviously the longer range we go at this has benefits, but we're also, in some ways on the cusp of a transportation revolution, and so locking us into, maybe antiquated modes when the whole system could get, redesigned needs to be a part of, I think, the thought process of what's proposed.
And I think some of that was the discussion with the flexibility, because we don't know what tomorrow will bring. We've seen a lot of changes over the past 20 years since this has been in place, so that is definitely part of the discussion too. Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it. Next, we'll have a presentation on our noise ordinance. Is it Elena that's going to present? Hi, Elena. Could you introduce yourself? Because I don't want to try and pronounce your last name. This is the first time I've had to introduce you in person.
It's okay. Good evening, everyone. By way of reminder, my name is Magdalena Jorquez. Maybe next time I'll spell it phonetically. And it's assistant town attorney, and it's great to see you all again. Welcome back. And just by way of reminder, today I'll be, as Mayor indicated, I'll be giving a kind of a broad overview of the noise ordinance. A recent project came to your attention a couple of months ago, and some questions came up regarding our noise ordinance. So the purpose here today is just to give you a very broad overview of the noise ordinance, and then we'll go from there. And as I indicated, two of the objectives tonight is to, again, give you a broad overview of the Gilbert's noise ordinance, and it's also to allow for a demonstration today of the sound meter, and we have kind of the more practical application of our ordinance through a demonstration through our code compliance administrator, Lori DeOrio, as well as her assistant chief Angsted will be here kind of demonstrating the sound meter and available for questions again on the practical application of our noise ordinance. So I'll go ahead and get started. Just a kind of a brief history of where our noise ordinance began. It actually began, and I didn't include it here, but it began in 1984. But it wasn't until the early 2000s that there was quite a few provisions that were missing, especially related to construction. So there were a lot of complaints being generated as the town grew about construction noise complaints. And so early 2000, the town of Gilbert adopted extensive amendments to the town code, especially with respect to the construction noise complaints. And this is the first time that we included kind of the decibel levels as the measurement of noise. And then again, so that kind of started the timeline of where we are today. But then in the mid 2002, the town council went back and looked again at the noise ordinance, expanded that to include 24-hour regulations. It also made some distinctions, zoning distinctions, residential, commercial, and industrial that we'll be going over shortly. And it also included provisions regarding special noise sources, things like power plants, motor vehicles, again, construction noises. And then from 2002, 2017, it was, no pun intended, it was kind of quiet. And then about 2017, the town attorney's office started to get some requests to again, just take another look at the noise ordinance, and just to make sure that the decibel-based measurement was sufficient for the town. And then between 2017 2018, there were a couple of drafts, and I'll be going over that a little bit more in detail, but this presentation really does focus in on the period between 2017 2018, and I'll describe kind of the little bit of the rub between our objective decibel-based measurements and then more of a subjective, or a reasonable or unreasonable noise measurement. And kind of laying the groundwork for that, there are two different types of noise ordinances. Again, it's the objective one, and then that's measured through our decibel-based measurement system. And then there's also the subjective, which uses a reasonable person standard. And that's not defined in code or statute, but it's been defined, defined by case law as a duty that each person owes to behave as a responsible person would under similar or the same circumstances. And so our objective standard, our objective ordinance is codified in section 42-61E1, and it really codifies kind of what Lori and Assistant Chief Angstead here are here to demonstrate, and that would be the decibel-based measurement. And just kind of going through the bullet points, it's unlawful for a person to create any noise which would cause the noise level to be measured from the inside with the windows and doors closed of the dwelling, building, or suite to exceed the following noise standards for more than 15 minutes in commercial or industrial areas, or 5 minutes in residential. And as you can see, the zoning classifications are divided between residential, commercial, and industrial, and we also have the 24 hours that's accounted for. And then kind of getting to our subjective standard, that's codified in section 4264. And the highlighted area is the area that was amended in response to the 2017-2018 request to revisit that, this section. So anything that's not highlighted was existing since 2002. And the highlighted area is really based on our disturbance of the peace ordinance, and it applies to residential areas. And it prohibits a person from yelling, shouting, making, or allowing any unreasonably loud or disturbing noise to occur on one's property between 9 p.m. or 7 a.m. or at any time so as to disturb the peace, the quiet, comfort, or repose that a reasonable person of ordinary sensitivity would have. Also included in the statute are 14 factors that should be considered in determining whether a violation of the provisions exist, and I have those on another slide. Again, I didn't include them here just for the sake of our time constraints. And again, kind of going back to that timeline starting in 2017, as I mentioned, there was a request to revise the town code, and part of the guidance that was given from town council was to improve the noise control regulations, enhance the ability of the Gilbert Police Department to respond effectively to noise and disturbance complaints, especially where those complaints didn't rise to the level of exceeding those decibel measurements, but still cause for concern in the residential areas, and also to provide an adequate deterrent for adopting criminal penalties. In January of 2018, the first draft was introduced to the town council, and at that time it was postponed because the council wanted to solicit more feedback from the stakeholder community. So from January to February, the town went to various stakeholder groups within the town and really received that feedback and came back and introduced the second draft in February of 2018. And among those stakeholders were Gilbert Chamber of Commerce, the Bliss Realty and Investments, Gilbert's Council of community associations, as well as the Gilbert Chief of Police and Assistant Chief of Police. And out of those conversations with stakeholder concern, part of the stakeholders' concerns that was articulated there, they wanted to avoid overly broad or subjective noise. So if you recall, there was a first draft that pretty much did away with all of the decibel-based measurements, and the stakeholder community came back and said, you know, we really do need those decibel-based measurements as well. So we want to avoid overly broad or subjective noise regulations that result in unintended consequences. And as a result, they wanted to retain that decibel-based approach in 4261. They also wanted to retain that reasonable person approach, that the part that was not highlighted, but as well as expanding it, and that was that yellow expanded area that you saw. So they wanted to look at different ways that would arm the enforcement and law enforcement and code compliance with the tools that they needed to really kind of address it more comprehensively. They also wanted to provide the public with adequate notice, and they also wanted to give enforcement the discretion to give warnings, to offer education, and to really make it more of a community-based type of subjective and objective ordinance scheme. And I feel like I've really kind of sped through that, but we're kind of getting to the second portion of today's presentation, which includes the demonstration of the sound meter. And just kind of to set that up, I just wanted to let you know that the number of complaints that we received and processed for fiscal year 21 from code enforcement, we got 13 complaints that we received and processed, and then Gilbert Police Department received 10. And just a little bit of background about noise meters, they're required to be professionally certified and recalibrated every 2 years at a minimum. And if it's being used in an evidentiary proceeding, it's recommended that the certification be completed every year. And then with that, I'd like to turn it over to our Code Compliance Administrator, Ms. D'Orio, as well as Assistant Chief Angstead, to again demonstrate the sound meter and to be available to answer questions just on how the ordinance is applied in the practical everyday sense. And then all three of us will be back for questions. So,
Thanks, Elena.
You're welcome.
Come on down, Lori. Or are you going to talk from there? Oh.
I can if you want me to.
Oh, it's okay. Come down.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is not a usual position for me. There you go. Assistant Chief Angstead and myself are going to give a brief presentation on how we go ahead and take a look and address noise complaints or concerns residents may have. And currently, Code Compliance utilizes Model TES 1350. It's a noise meter, great, sensitive, well-tested noise meter. We've used it for years. Each one of our meters are recalibrated professionally and locally by a company here, so that if, in fact, we will in the future have a case that potentially would go to court, we would have it professionally certified that'd be available for evidentiary purposes. So what we're going to do is I have a Bluetooth speaker, and we're going to gauge the first reading on a residential, the minimum 45 decibel reading that we would, the most sensitive as far as sound for a residential community within a building with the windows closed as according to the code. So, Mike, if you want to start with that, I'll go ahead and turn on the meter. And it is quite sensitive. No, I am not measuring ambient right now. I'm just measuring the fan. We do measure, because the code specifically says to measure and it doesn't separate ambient within the code, unless there's extenuating circumstances. Recently, we had a gentleman who had a complaint regarding their neighbor's AC unit. And what we learned was both his AC unit as well as his neighbor's AC unit was located on the same side of the house. So what we had to do was we actually had to turn his AC unit off to be able to properly gauge whether his neighbor's unit was offensive. So it does come down to, at times, locational challenges, and we do have to take into consideration ambient noise too. So right now,
Microphone so everybody can
sure.
Presentation. Thanks.
I set this kind of off, unfortunately, when the meter, because it's so sensitive, but at this, basically when I was standing right there, it's already at 55 decibels. So that would be a normal sound threshold for us at a residential home during the day. And then it would even be lowered 10 decibels.
Okay, that would be in the house with the windows and doors closed, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So we do have a very sensitive noise ordinance that takes into consideration the decibel levels. That's where sometimes we have the latitude with the subjective part of the ordinance as well to look at the overall sensitivity of the situation.
Any questions for Lori? Go ahead, Vice Mayor.
I have a couple questions about the code and having areas defined, whether it's residential, commercial, or industrial. How are other areas addressed, such as public right-of-way, parks, or schools?
Specifically, the code, when you're taking a reading, the lower of the districts, the threshold would be taken into consideration. You always look to the neighboring district and what the lower threshold would be. And most of the time currently, it is a residential issue that we're looking into and how it's affecting residents adjacent to another district.
Has there been any consideration for special events, such as this year with the 4th of July fireworks?
We really haven't had an issue when it came down to special events. Our Parks and Rec team worked very, very diligently at redirecting speakers and making it, they're very sensitive to the communities that are around special events occurring. So when we meet with the special events committee and we go through all the different aspects of the special event, we take into consideration how can we remediate some of these concerns.
Maybe that's a question for Elena too, because it looks like there's a slide. The next slide talks about the different sections of our code that regulate other areas such as special events. I don't know if that's substantively, I haven't looked at this code, so I don't know if it's substantively different or if it refers back to this noise ordinance.
Mayor and Council Member Yentis, if I heard your first question correctly, and I'm sorry if I believe you posed it, you refer to schools? Did you refer to schools as what zoning classification? My apologies.
Yeah, I was asking about how areas outside of the residential, commercial, and industrial areas, how they are addressed, and I think it was answered that it would be the nearest zone with the most stringent noise ordinance.
Yeah, if it kind of falls between the two classifications, that's correct. There's a provision in the noise ordinance that requires us to use the lower standard. With respect to perhaps, the definition section does define commercial area, and then it refers back to the land development code and including the definition of commercial zoning, which includes things like the public facility, let's see if I get this, public facility institutional type zones. So although again, the noise ordinance kind of refers back to the LDC and then relies on the definition there. And then, my apologies again, can you remind me of the second question?
Oh, I didn't have a second question. I just said we had another slide that points out a different section of code related to special events.
Oh,
that was brought up.
There was a lot of ambient noise, so I was over here.
Vice Mayor, Elena, if I may, sorry, sounds really loud, but there's in that section of the noise ordinance 4261, there's 14 exceptions listed. Emergency vehicles, special events approved by the town pursuant to a valid permit is one of those exceptions.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thank you. Actually, I do recall. I think there's a section with respect to loudspeakers, amplifiers, and noise trucks, and then a whole section that kind of spells out the permitting requirements. They would essentially, and I'd have to look a little bit deeper into this question, but there is a permitting section that things like special events would have to go through the town for special permission.
Mayor, I have a question. Elena, thanks for sharing kind of the history of how we got to our code today. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, do you know why we chose to take a reading for the decibel reading inside of a resident versus at the property line? And I don't know if that's, I've read some other noise ordinances from some other jurisdictions, and there seems to be more interest in the decibel level at the property line versus inside of a home. In fact, I didn't see that in the codes that I did review. Everything seemed to have to do with outside, which seems to make sense because you may want to enjoy your backyard or your front yard or some other portion of your property besides inside your home. Do you have any background on why we chose that measurement standard?
Mayor, Council Member, September. Not specifically. I didn't run across anything specifically that pointed to that rationale. And I have it's my understanding that it does run the gamut across jurisdictions in terms of where it's measured. And anecdotally, I've heard that the rationale for it being inside is that property lines vary. So you may have a house that is set back, a quarter of an acre back versus, just a regular standard size suburban yard. And then by measuring it on the inside, it accounts for fairness. But that's one rationale, one justification. I'm sure there's the counter just based on the jurisdiction. But I can see if I can do a little bit more digging, but I read through the study, kind of the staff reports and such, and it didn't mention anything of that nature.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Lori or Chief or Elena?
I have a question for is it Lori?
Lori.
Lori. So, Lori, I know your experience in code enforcement comes before Gilbert, right? You were at the City of Phoenix for a while.
Correct.
How does the City of Phoenix address their noise ordinance? Is it a combination of subjective and objective? Is it one or the other? And do they have a standard that measures decibels from a certain point?
And it's been a little bit of time since I've been there. But from what I can remember and the noise readings I did take when I was an inspector there, it was at the property line, both for light as well as noise meters were taken at the property line at that time. Now, it may have changed. I'm not aware of what the current code is.
Thank you.
Follow up to that, Lori, was that for every designation of land, LI, commercial, residential?
Yes, that was their threshold, was at the property
Everything
line.
at the property line. Thank you. Councilmember Anderson?
Just a question for us. What's our objective here? What are we going to do? Because we promised those neighborhoods that we'd take a look at this and tweak it where it might make sense.
Very good question. I would love some input from the council members if you would like to ask staff to go back and do a little more research. Elaine mentioned that she could do some research on what other jurisdictions are doing, and it's been suggested that we look at a couple of other specific jurisdictions, which I think it's a great opportunity for us to hear what other cities and towns are doing.
Yeah, Mayor, I agree. I'd like to see some other ordinances and have staff kind of present what other jurisdictions are doing, how they're measuring, how they're enforcing, and see if there's some codes and provisions that we might entertain for Gilbert for our use.
I think.
Do we want to get any other stakeholders involved? I noticed in the past we had the chamber and others involved also.
I would say stakeholders would be a definite plus, but let's let staff go back and do some research first so that they have something to bring to the stakeholder groups. Does that make sense? And so I think based on the questions that you heard here tonight, Elena, Lori, Mike, that you would have enough to follow up on of what the council has asked, so where they're curious about certain items, in measuring from inside, outside property line, different jurisdictions, what they do. I think there's enough probably to give you a good direction there. Yes, Councilmember Tilke.
Sorry, Mayor, thank you. I don't have a problem with researching what others are doing and taking a look at that. I don't think we're at the point where we do a stakeholders group. I think it's information back to us to see if there is any need to do anything further. Quite frankly, I've been involved with the noise ordinance since 2002 and before. So I've sat through all those meetings. I've been negotiating throughout that time, and I'm very cautious with the impact on the business community when we get over anxious on where we actually measure it and how we measure it. And in addition to that, it has to be enforceable. It makes no sense to create an ordinance or any kind of law that isn't enforceable based on good measures. And so I don't mind taking a look to see if there's a better way to doing it. I'm just not prepared to create a stakeholder group at this point until we find out that we don't have a good ordinance. And quite frankly, I think we do. So that's where I stand. Thank you.
Member Yentes?
Yeah, well, and perhaps part of that investigation, you cited how many complaints we've had. I think was that in a year period of time, both by police and by code enforcement, whatever that time frame is. If we could dive into that, and obviously we don't have to know who is complaining about noise, but just if they're circled around a specific area, so we know, like, okay, maybe we can apply what we have on the books as far as kind of these specific areas that are reoccurring issues. That might be helpful for direction. I think any potential changes would probably be made to that objective standard. I think the reasonable language makes sense because the objective standard is kind of like we've all decided that this level of noise is unreasonable, and so that's easy, and it makes sense to have a measurable standard. But I think it also makes sense to have kind of a catch-all that's more incumbent upon the person to take it as a civil matter, and then there's obviously findings of fact that go into that's more case by case. But I would suspect that any changes that might be contemplated would be to that objective standard, whether that's changing it to the property line or, we have this interesting provision where you got to close all the windows. So anything like that, I think, would be where that would be focused. But if we could delve into, actually what I would say the heart of these complaints that we have received might be helpful information too.
Great points. Councilmember Anderson, did you have something else?
No, I agree with Councilmember Tilke that a stakeholder group, if we're going to just make minor adjustments to this, there's no need to do that. But I think we'll just have to follow it to the next step and see.
So we'll have staff do a little investigating, do a little homework, bring it back to council before anything else moves forward. whether that be to a stakeholders group or some potential changes, because they could be minor tweaks. Or Councilmember Hendricks, did you have something? Did you want to say anything? Sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time understanding the sound up here. I can't understand everybody. Too much noise. Too much noise, there you go. I think we got to be careful we're not finding a solution for a problem that's not existent. When we heard the previous presentation, we heard from an expert that didn't like our sound ordinance, and so we decided to talk about our sound ordinance. As I was just sitting here and we were listening to their sound meter, I just took my phone and I just Googled common decibel levels of appliances. And I don't know if this is accurate or not, it just came up on my phone. But our current code, I believe, allows 55 decibels for 15 minutes, is that right?
Depending on the zoning. If it's residential, it's 5.
Oh, residential. So in residential, just looking through this list, it says an average refrigerator is 50 decibels. Now, this may or may not be accurate, but that's what it says. So if our code allows 55, if my refrigerator wasn't functioning properly, I may be breaking the law by having my refrigerator in my kitchen. Vacuum cleaner, 70 decibels. Hair dryer, 70 decibels. Dishwashers, depending on energy efficiency, between 70 and 85 decibels. So if your dishwasher ran more than 15 minutes and you had a low-quality dishwasher, you'd be in violation of our code. You may have to do your dishes in shifts, maybe do 15 minutes and then shut it down and wait a while and do 15 more. So I think we want to be careful that we're not looking for a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. And these numbers may not be accurate. Like I say, I just pulled them up as we were sitting here. But I certainly wouldn't want to shut off my dishwasher every 15 minutes so I don't violate the noise code, which maybe I already am.
Thank you. Any follow-up? Thank you, team. Great presentation. Off and do some homework for us.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will go ahead and adjourn our study session, and we are going to take at least 5-minute break before we come back to start our next meeting. Thank you.